Joining me today in studio is Cape and Island State Senator Julian Cyr. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you again.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some legislative things that have been happening. The two biggest ones are going to be the tax cuts that Governor Healey signed on October 4th. So fairly recently, they're still very new. There's a lot of them. So let's kind of jump into that.
Taxes and then housing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Two big, very important issues.
So the legislature took up, before the summer recess, tax packages. We reconciled those. Governor signed it into law. It's a historic $1 billion tax relief package that's really focused on affordability for working families here in Massachusetts, and that is more important now than ever for Cape Codders and people in Barnstable and across the Cape and Islands, right, who are struggling to make a life here, largely thanks to the cost of housing, right? So this is a $1 billion package. It's probably the biggest. It's the biggest tax relief we've done in anyone's memory, certainly in our lifetimes.
Yes, very much so.
So lots of really big things in here. What we do first is, we expand the child and dependent tax credit and other tax credits to families, the earned income tax credit as well. We we increase the rental deduction from $3,000 to $4,000. A number of other sort of pieces that help working families. On average, a working family, here in Barnstable or across the Cape in Massachusetts, is going to see about an additional $1,000 in their tax returns.
Wow.
That's money coming right back to them. So this is really about, a family, again, if you have, an average of 2 children, that's very, very significant and meaningful. And at a time when Cape Codders and Islanders are really scraping things together to make ends meet, especially when tax season comes in April, right, which is, often at the end of a really long, lean winter.
Yes.
This is really big help for them. So we do that kind of proponent there. Then we look at a number of other kind of tax provisions that have been out of date and needed to be updated. One piece I've really championed has been updating the estate tax. So the estate tax here in Massachusetts, our estate tax threshold has been among the lowest in the country at $1 million. This was designed to be a progressive tax, right? So those with significant resources, would pay, and families, who did not have those resources wouldn't. But of course, because of the cost of housing and the valuation of people's homes, a generation or two ago, it was a lot more difficult to have a home that was valued at $1 million. Now here today on Cape Cod, it's pretty easy, right? Yes. I think of, my family has a home, a modest home they bought for maybe $100,000. I'm sure now in Truro it's worth more than $1 million.
Oh, yeah.
And we've heard from constituents on Nantucket, here in Barnstable, and on the islands about this issue. So the estate tax is raised to a $2 million threshold, which again is really designed to help working families, here on the Cape and Islands. Often increasingly, right, that family home is often people's only foothold here.
Yes.
So we do that, and then the tax relief package also takes into account some truly real local concerns. If we're in Barnstable, we got to be talking about wastewater, right? We got a nearly $1 billion challenge here in the town. And a lot of that is being paid for, and we're moving forward with sewering, right?
Yep.
But we have a number of homes on septic systems or worse, cesspools that are going to need to be upgraded. So there's an existing tax credit for Title V septic upgrades. We triple the tax credit,
Right.
Up to $18,000. We accelerate the tax credit so you can tap into it sooner. So this is our way of helping homeowners and residents who are going to need to upgrade their septic systems to meet water quality standards. So that's another piece where we're doing a lot of work. It's going to be really helpful, particularly in parts of Barnstable, right? If you're not on a planned sewer, that's a piece that's coming. So another really important piece there.
Yeah.
And then lots more of other things. The Senate.
It's a huge list.
Yeah, you want me to talk?
There's 25 things on this list.
It's a very substantial. We won't be here all day, but it's a very substantial, meaningful list, and the place where the Senate really focused, and these ended up in the final bill. We really focused on housing.
Yeah.
So we increased the amount of money we put to the low-income housing tax credit, which is what funds many of the affordable housing projects around the region. That went from $40 million to $60 million, a 50% increase. We also have a tax credit for gateway cities, of which Hyannis qualifies as one, to build housing. That as well is the HDIP program, it's called. That has increased pretty substantially. That's going to mean more dollars for building the housing we need here, yes, in Hyannis and then across the region. And then there's a provision that I championed. It's a local option. It's a local option property tax exemption for good landlords. So for people who own property, who are renting on year-round at affordable rates,
Yes.
To allow towns to give a property tax exemption, just to really say sort of thank you for keeping that housing on the year-round rental market.
Right.
We know that the market here for short-term rentals, you're always going to be able to make more money if you rent, night by night. In my neck of the woods in the Outer Cape, I think it's 34 nights equals the revenue you would make renting for 34
Wow.
nights. Equals the revenue you'd make in a year renting. We know we can't compete with that.
No, there's no
but
competing
just
with
in a
that.
way to sort of say thank you.
Yeah, if you are going to take that second home that you own or the home that you do own, and instead of giving it, a short-term rental, you're going to rent it year-round to someone who's here, contributing to our community,
Yep.
contributing to our economy year-round.
And really work to retain, right?
Yes.
We need to retain the rental stock that we have. So this is an idea that comes out of Provincetown, actually. They had a version of a home rule like this. We apply that statewide. It's a local option that hopefully the town of Barnstable and towns across the region will tap into. And it allows the town to have that property tax exemption for landlords who are renting at year-round affordable, year-round people at affordable rates. So
Yeah,
this is another good thing that's in this bill. But it's a
Yes.
pretty hefty tax package, and it does a lot to help working Cape Cod families,
Right.
who are really struggling to make it here.
And every little bit counts. It might seem small to some people, but there are people that every little bit that they can find savings in. And there's a lot of things on this list that are going to affect people across the state here on Cape
Yeah.
Cod at every, kind of income level. Maybe not the people on the higher end, but the
No,
lower and middle class. is
Another
definitely
example,
gonna-
that senior citizen circuit breaker,
Yes,
right?
yes,
We
that-
doubled the senior citizen circuit breaker, right? So in this tax package, there's things for seniors, for
Yep.
families, for people who are trying to provide housing on a year-round basis. It's a pretty historic package, and really one I think we should feel really good about, and I think is going to be pretty meaningful for Cape Codders and Islanders, particularly as they go to file their their taxes.
Oh, yeah.
In the coming years.
They're going to see that difference. The other thing we wanted to talk about is Governor Healey also recently, she brought up an Affordable Homes Act just
Sure.
a couple weeks ago at the end of middle of October. So let's talk a little bit about what that is, because that's a bill. So it wasn't an executive order. So I know some people were disappointed that it wasn't an executive order, but I think, we're still going to end up with something great.
Well, there's only so much the governor can
Exactly,
do for certain.
exactly.
That's why we have a legislature to sort of move certain things along.
Yeah.
Look, housing. I really view housing as the number one, the number one issue in the region. And when you look at the viability of our communities, at least from a short-term perspective, people cannot afford to live here, particularly people of our generation, right? We have data now from the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce showing 47% of our workforce, right, is commuting over the bridges.
Yeah.
Median home price in Barnstable County in the last 5 years has increased 77%, right? It's just increasingly impossible for people to compete in this real estate market, to be able to hope to afford anything. I'm someone who rents, I don't own, right? I really struggle to even,
Yeah.
Figure this out. And look, I'm someone of resource and kind of a pretty connected guy, right?
Yeah.
So we've really been focusing on housing, and Governor Healey and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll have been amazing partners, really from day one. They've sunk their teeth into this housing issue. They've spent time here in Barnstable. Actually, we're recording this just earlier. I was with the governor in Yarmouth. Governor's come to Nantucket and to Martha's Vineyard and to Provincetown, all talking about housing.
Yep.
And so what the governor's done is actually take a number of the ideas that we've been promoting, that myself and Representative Diggs and Representative Sarah Peak and the rest of the delegation have been trying to advance, and she incorporated those in as part of a $4 billion housing bond bill. So this package is about building and preserving. We need about 200,000 housing units by the end of the decade here in Massachusetts if we're going to change, if we're going to reverse course on the housing crisis. Yeah. And so there's a whole host of money in there for tax credit programs and direct funding to build housing, to preserve housing. There's also a number of really crucial policy initiatives that really will benefit Cape Cod and island communities. probably the biggest one is the governor proposes a transfer fee on luxury real estate.
Yes.
So this is saying, all right, we're going to take a small percentage, and use that money to fund local housing. This is actually based on a model on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. We already use a transfer fee to fund land preservation, their land banks. So this would be using that transfer fee as a revenue mechanism.
Right.
So we can generate money, right? Not on middle income housing sales, but on luxury home sales.
Yep.
Use that money then that we can bring back right here into our community to help fund and build the housing we need. And why we need this is so important. I was talking earlier about low income housing tax credits and others. Most all of the state and federal housing programs support housing for people who are at or below area median income. But here on the Cape, and especially in the extremities, right? Come to my neck of the woods on the outer Cape.
Yeah.
Come to the islands. We're talking about needing to subsidize housing for people who make 150, 180, 200% of area median income.
Oh, yeah.
On Nantucket,
Yeah.
it's not Nantucket, it's like, all right, we're gonna have to subsidize housing for people who make up to 240%. So the transfer fee, right, that's our revenue source.
Right.
Where we can both build and preserve the workforce housing that we need to have, a sustainable year-round economy and to continue to have some viability, in our region. So I'm really excited about this. This is a big, courageous thing that the governor and the lieutenant governor have done in their bill. Cape Codders should be excited about this. This is a game changer in the way that she's proposed this, and really I think could provide towns like Barnstable with an additional revenue source. Yes, to build workforce housing and also to preserve housing. Notice I'm saying build and preserve, right?
Yep.
There's another idea that we have out there around saying, municipalities may want the option to be able to buy a year-round deed restriction, right, on a home to keep homes in the year-round housing market. So transfer fee is a big thing in there. The second piece she proposes to create a seasonal communities designation.
Right.
I mentioned earlier the concept of a gateway city and gateway cities, of which Hyannis and parts of Yarmouth are one. So a seasonal communities designation would allow the state to come in and look and say, all right, what are the special considerations and needs that seasonal communities like ours have around housing?
Right.
And then there's a whole host of other really good things, in this bill. So folks should check it out. Next it's going to go to the legislative process. The bill will have a hearing before the Joint Committee on Housing. It'll then go before the Joint Committee on Bonding. The House of Representatives will take it up, the Senate will take it up, and then we'll work to reconcile something before the end of the legislative session next summer. But really, this is the number one issue I hear from Cape Codders and Islanders all the time. I can't tell you how many times I'll stop into a little like rest area or park, right? I'm driving all around the Cape and I'll see, I'm like, oh, that car's like filled to the brim, right? And there's probably an older woman, maybe she's 60s and her 70s, she's living in her car.
Yeah.
I was just at Community Connections in Yarmouth earlier today. They're a developmental service provider. They help people with developmental disabilities, live fulfilling lives. They have, they can't fill vacancies, right, to provide services. They have staff who are living in their cars because they can't afford to live here. If we don't change course on housing, we will not have sustainable year-round communities.
Yeah.
And that calls into question a whole host of challenges, certainly for employers, but also for, just what our communities are about, the vibrancy of this place. And so that's why I'm fighting really hard around housing, right? That we need to really keep up housing production and preservation, that the state's going to do everything we can to deliver tools and be partners with the towns on this really challenging issue.
I think it's important to get the word out to the other parts of the state that the Cape is not just a seasonal place. There are people who live here year-round and they need housing year-round and they need all the help that we can get.
I'm telling that story every single day, and what's been really encouraging is to have administration and Governor Healey and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll who've really not been afraid to sink their teeth into the tough challenges that Cape Codders and Islanders face.
Right.
A few weeks ago I sat down. We had the Lieutenant Governor here, actually in Barnstable again. And after the meeting we had with municipal leaders, we sat down. We spent 90 minutes going through the wastewater funding challenges we have. How do we bring more resources into the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund? How do we think creatively here? So really working hard on a number of real issues. But especially housing, wastewater, really trying to make a dent there, and tax relief. So it's all All good stuff
It
with
is.
more on the way, hopefully.
Wonderful. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always good
Appreciate
to be
it.
with you.